and an important topic today, and that is about the vitamin D. So there's a new study about vitamin D, relatively new. It's about 10, 15 days older or a month older, something like that. It is a relatively new study which is focused on the COVID-19 patients and the levels of the vitamin D in them. So the study, what they have done is, hello. So what they've done is that they've taken countries like US, I believe, France, and UK. In these countries, from these countries, they have obtained the lab data for some of the patients. And then from that lab data, they have extrapolated the vitamin D levels. So they do not know directly if somebody was taking vitamin D or not taking vitamin D. So how did they find that out? What they did was they had another study, which I'll show you in a second. They had another study which had said in the past that vitamin D and C-reactive protein have a correlation with each other. So there's another protein, and I'll discuss that protein as well. I'm giving you a summary of the discussion today. So there was a study that showed that vitamin D and C-reactive protein have a correlation with each other. Based on that data from that study, this new study obtained the C-reactive protein, which is normally done for the hospitalized patients as an assessment for the severity of the inflammation or the disease. So then they correlated the levels of C-reactive protein to the level of vitamin D in that person. From there, then they correlated that data to the mortality or the severity or chances of a COVID-19 hospitalized patient to become severe. So fascinating study, beautiful. And the takeaway was that people who have or hospitalized patients who were deficient in vitamin D, they had a greater risk of becoming severe compared to those who were not. So that is a very, very important thought. And the C-reactive protein, to use that to kind of as a surrogate for vitamin D, as a representative of vitamin D, is a very interesting idea as well. So I wanted to make sure that we look at this study together and understand once more how vitamin D is helping in the early stage of the disease as well. So just like hydroxychloroquine and zinc, in the early part of the disease, making sure that the patient doesn't go from, or the chances of a patient becoming severe are less. That is the same case for vitamin D as well. So let's look at this one. So I'm going to show the studies right now. So I'm going to share my screen. This is the discussion. I'm going to go into the mechanics now. And so I'm going to show the studies. So here we are. The study, what they found was that reduced vitamin D levels lead to increased risk of CRP. So this is the correlation that they have. That C-reactive protein, the CRP over here, the C-reactive protein is tied with vitamin D levels. And vitamin D levels are tied with the C-reactive protein. So take this as one unit. Take these two as a surrogate for each other, as a representative for each other. At least that is what they did in that study. Now, when the vitamin D level is low, that increases mortality and morbidity, or that increases the chances of a patient becoming severely ill because of the following mechanism. Number one, innate arm response of our immune system is blunted, or it is reduced in the vitamin D deficient patients. And we will discuss that today. We have talked about it many times before as well. Number two, because the innate arm is not working correctly, innate arm is like the first responder. So let's say this is the wall, and here is the pathogen. When the pathogen attacks us, the very first responders or defenders are the innate arm. And the innate arm cells, where they take care of the virus until the adaptive arm, which is the T cells and B cells, that becomes ready in 7 to 10 days. So in this study, they had used the readying time of the adaptive arm to be 7 days. So what they saw was that the innate arm, this arm, which was supposed to take care of the virus, as the virus enters our body and starts replicating and starts causing disease, that innate arm, in the absence, in the reduction of vitamin D, in deficiency of vitamin D, does not function correctly, which allows the virus to live here for 7 days in our body, less hindered by the immune system, and kind of have a party and keep replicating and keep having fun, and in that process, destroy our tissues. But even more importantly, the viral load increases. What does that mean? The amount of virus present in the body is increased now. Why? Because nobody was stopping it from replicating. So there's a lot of virus in our body. That is increased load. Now, when the adaptive arm becomes ready, when this arm then becomes ready after 7 days, guess what? It looks at a tons of virus in our body. There's too much virus in our body. Why there are too many virus in our body? Because we were vitamin D deficient. That made the innate arm less functional. That allowed the virus to become replicated a lot. When the adaptive arm became active, it looked around and it saw a lot of virus. Guess what did it do? It created the cytokine storm. Or, as we have discussed many times before, it created a severe immune response. That severe immune response, that imbalanced immune response, that harsh immune response responds to the virus a little less, but causes more damage to us. Enough damage to put us in ICU or even kill us. So do you see what is happening here? This is the mechanism. Very, very important mechanism. The mechanism is that the virus innate arm is blunted. And we have talked about this in the past as well, that this specific virus blunts our innate arm in many ways. For example, remember we talked about it in natural killer disease video, that the natural killer cells are reduced. Remember we talked about it, that it sends in the ivermectin discussion, which unfortunately is taken down by YouTube, that the virus sends a messenger in our DNA, in our cell's nucleus, to ask it to not defend itself. And that causes the initial immediate defenses of the cells to be torn down, which allows the innate arm not to work. This is like a virus has invaded us, and if we are a castle, the guards that are sitting at the castle, virus makes them go to sleep. Then the virus has all the world to it. It goes and replicates until the internal defenders wake up in 7 days. Till that time, the virus has replicated so much that when these defenders, the adaptive arm, when they wake up, they have a harsh response, which ends up damaging us. Yeah, so Nomad says that, did you say that HCQ and zinc should be beneficial in the early stages of disease? Shame on you for telling the truth. YouTube is going to slap you. Yeah, so that has already happened. They have already taken down much of my videos. We talked about this, Nomad, yesterday as well. So I'll keep saying it. They'll keep taking my videos down. So what can I do? All right. So back here. So is this clear? So Silva Siren says, what is your reason for the YouTube removing your videos? I have no idea. They should know. They just flag my videos as inappropriate content and simply say that it needs to be removed. So see here, this is the study. Somebody had asked me what is the study. It is in MedRxiv. The study is April 30. So that was recent in my opinion, about 17 days ago. The study says the possible role of vitamin D in suppressing cytokine storm and associated mortality in COVID-19 patients. Possible role of vitamin D. I have the study downloaded. I want to just show you the result here before we go there. Here, read this. It says, let me actually go to the PDF. It would be easier to read it here. So here, I hope you can see this part. It says vitamin D may reduce COVID-19 fatality by suppressing cytokine storm. Specifically, the risk of severe COVID-19 cases among patients with severe vitamin D deficiency is 17.3%. So with the vitamin D deficiency, the risk of severe case is 17.3%, while equivalent figure for patients with normal vitamin D is 14.6%, a reduction of 15.6%. This potential effect may be attributed to vitamin D's ability to suppress the adaptive immune system, regulating cytokine level and thereby reducing the risk of developing severe COVID-19. So that is the study here. I'm going to explain what they did in the study or the mechanics of the studies. So look at this study here. Once again, this is the study. I'm going to now go into the detail of what they have done. So look, first of all, this is very, very sharp of them that they used C-reactive protein as a representative of the vitamin D levels. So what they did was, here they have another study which they use. So that study is this one. So if you see this study, this is it says the possible role of solar ultraviolet-B radiation and vitamin D in reducing case fatality role. So this is one study they used. This study says that in the 1918 and 1919 influenza pandemic in the US, the patients who were deficient in vitamin D had more severe cytokine storms compared to patients who were not. However, at that time, vitamin D, I think itself was not derived. So the strength of the study is that this said that the patient who were less exposed to sunlight were more prone to developing cytokine storm, because at that time there was no vitamin D supplement. So that is the purity and beauty of this study. So the study had done the analysis on the people who lived at different latitudes within the US, and then the amount of ultraviolet rays available on those latitudes. And they found out that wherever there was more sun available and more ultraviolet rays available, that is where people died less. And those areas of the US where there was less sun available or less intensity of the ultraviolet rays was present, that is where more people died. They also observed that people with the skin that is dark, like mine, that have more pigment in their skin, were also more exposed to the risk of infections or severe infections. So this study that I'm talking about, they used this study as one proof that vitamin D, just an evidence that vitamin D deficiency can cause severe infections. That's one. Then they used this study here, vitamin D and immune system, in which, and I would show this again, that vitamin D helps the immune system become strong on the innate side and also strong on the adaptive side. So I would talk about that as well. Then they have this study. This is, look at this. This is their backbone study. This was another study which said C-reactive protein and vitamin D deficiency have a correlation. So this study was about the cardiovascular disease. What they were talking about was that when people are deficient in vitamin D and have a higher level of C-reactive protein, these patients or these persons are more prone to having cardiovascular diseases. So the study was aimed at cardiovascular diseases, but in that study, they had looked at a lot of data and correlation between C-reactive protein and the vitamin D. So, Shelly, thank you very much. Peer character dancing under a rain of confetti and taking his hat after you. You are amazing. Thank you very much. So, back here. So, these are the studies that they've used. For us, how do we start thinking about this? Start thinking about it this way, that number one, it is observed in the past that the deficiency of vitamin D levels is observed to have the patients who are deficient, they are observed to have severe infections, and that is in the flu pandemic in the US. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Second thing to keep in mind is that the people who are low on vitamin D have a corresponding high in the C-reactive protein. So that means if somebody is not present to tell you that they are taking vitamin D or not, but you can measure their C-reactive protein, you can tell if they were taking proper vitamin D or not, or if they had proper vitamin D or not. So here in this diagram that you're seeing, the function of the C-reactive protein is something else. It's an immediate acute phase reacting protein. It is released from our body when we get an infection, or over here if you can see inflammation or infection or trauma or necrosis or malignancy or allergic reactions. The thing is, in the acute phase, there are many proteins that body releases to protect itself. One of those proteins is C-reactive protein. C-reactive protein's function is to go and connect with the cells that are dying or that are dead, and then it helps those cells to be eliminated and helps working with the immune system. But we are not that much concerned with the C-reactive protein, other than this, that the patients who are vitamin D deficient have a higher level of C-reactive protein. Now, let's look at the immune system and vitamin D. This is what this study found. The study found that when somebody is normal in vitamin D levels, their risk of having high C-reactive protein is 45%. So now they're creating a correlation, which can be then reversed. And if you can say that, hey, if somebody has 45% high risk of C-reactive protein, then their vitamin D level is going to be normal. This is what they used as their formula to figure out which patients had what vitamin D level. So here, if the vitamin D was insufficient, which is defined as 50 to 75 nanomole per liter, then the risk of high CRP was 50%. If the vitamin C was deficient, which is defined in these studies as 25 to 50 nanomole per liter, then the C-reactive protein was 57%. And then if vitamin D level was lesser than 25 nanomole per liter, then that is called severely deficient, and these patients had a lot of C-reactive protein. Now, if you reverse this thought, then the patient who had a lot of C-reactive protein were really deficient in vitamin D. And they are the patients who were at a higher risk of becoming severe and dying. Now the question is, how does vitamin D does this? And we have done this discussion many times, and I'll do this once more here. Just a very quick recap of how vitamin D helps. So let's look at an innate arm cell. Let's say this is a macrophage. So this macrophage would eat up the coronavirus, correct? It is going to eat up the coronavirus. And when the coronavirus is eaten up, the macrophage is going to do what? We have done this discussion many times. It is going to connect with a naive T cell. A naive T cell. Naive T cell is like, I do not know what should I do in my life. I am a zero cell, naive T cell. It is also called a T helper cell. Naive T cell can become a T helper 1 cell, or it can become a T helper 2 cell based on what do we sprinkle on it, what interleukins we put on this. So if we put interleukin 12 on this naive T cell, then it becomes T helper 1. Now, the next thing to keep in mind for today's discussion, T helper 1 side is pro-inflammatory side. Pro-inflammatory side. That means if our immune system responds in this direction, then we can have severe cytokine storm. On the other hand, T helper 2 side is anti-inflammatory. Anti-inflammatory. That means if our immune system moves in the direction of T helper 2, then the inflammation will be controlled. Now, fortunately for us, generally for COVID-19, our body moves to T helper 2 in general. But here is the kicker. If the vitamin D levels are low, then the body's body's tendency to move towards T helper 1 is increased and a cytokine storm can occur. If we have proper vitamin D levels, then the body's tendency to move towards T helper 2 is increased and an anti-inflammatory reaction occurs and the overreaction by our immune system is controlled. How is it controlled though? Let's look at it. It is how it is controlled. What happens is, so let's go back to this situation here that we have the virus that came in, interleukin 12 is not released. Let's say instead of that, interleukin 4 was present in the system. When interleukin 4 was present and vitamin D was correct in its amount, then the T helper 2 cells, this naive cell becomes T helper 2 cell. When it becomes T helper 2 cell, the T helper 2 cell in turn, number one, releases interleukin 10, and we'll talk about it in a second. It releases interleukin 4 and interleukin 5. Interleukin 4 and 5 do many things, but one important thing is to activate the B cells and to proliferate them, meaning making copies of them and making them active. B cells then in turn will release antibodies. These are the golden antibodies we have been looking for to give in the convalescent plasma and make treatments from them. These antibodies then go to our systems and combat the virus. Good so far? This is when the vitamin D level is correct, normal, and this is when our immune system has moved towards T helper 2. Interleukin 10 is called an anti-inflammatory interleukin. Anti-inflammatory interleukin. Why is it called that? Number one, check this out. Interleukin 10 suppresses T helper 1 activation. So number one, it blocks the activation of T helper 1. And of course, that is anti-inflammatory because activation of T helper 1 is pro-inflammatory. Why is it pro-inflammatory? T helper 1 releases interleukin 2, then it releases interleukin 21, and then we can get interleukin 17 from here as well. Actually, no, we get tumor growth factor beta from macrophages plus interleukin 6 from macrophages, which activate T helper 17 that give interleukin 17. This interleukin 21 and this interleukin 21 and interleukin 17 are very important pro-inflammatory systems, interleukins. The question is, okay, we understand that if the immune system goes in this direction, the T helper 1 will produce interleukin 21, which is pro-inflammatory. How will we get interleukin 17? So remember this now, please check this out. T helper 1 that is active in turn activates macrophage by releasing interferon gamma. That activates the macrophage even more, and macrophage goes mad and it starts releasing tumor growth factor beta, interleukin 6, interleukin 1, interleukin 8, and so on. The result of that is that T helper 17 cell become active, which start releasing interleukin 17, which is also pro-inflammatory. So God forbid, if we have less vitamin D and we ended up on the T helper 1 side, we are in trouble. So the interleukin 10 that is released here by T helper 2 is doing us a favor by suppressing the activation of T helper 1, number one. Number two, interleukin 10 suppresses the expression of MHC2 on macrophages. And we have discussed this in the past that macrophages show the antigen on MHC2. These are their arms on which they put the antigen, MHC2. So interleukin 10 suppresses the expression of MHC2, which means it reduces the activity of innate arm of the immune system, which means adaptive arm will not become overly expressive. So it is controlling cytokine storm. This is only going to happen in the presence of correct amounts of vitamin D. Okay, so this is another thing it does. Then it also causes reduction in this bond here, the macrophage and the naive T cell. They need co-stimulatory molecules, or they need extra things to stimulate each other. This is like people hugging and kissing and stimulating in that way. So these guys are hugging and kissing, so they have multiple things to stimulate each other, and the co-stimulation is necessary for the immune system to become activated, and interleukin 10 suppresses the co-stimulation. All of this prevents the innate arm from overly activating the adaptive arm. This whole thing is adaptive arm. If it became overactivated, then we'll have a cytokine storm. And as you saw, that the adaptive arm in turn works with the innate arm. This is innate arm, except these T helper 17 are part of this one. And this is adaptive arm. So if the vitamin D level is correct, so there's a question here, super chat, 5 years. Doctor, would you take NSE, vitamin D3 and zinc when COVID-19 symptoms first appear? Absolutely. I would even take them before. Absolutely. So these things, I mean, if I have hydroxy available, I'll take hydroxy as well. But if I don't have hydroxy, I'll take quercetin at least for zinc. And I would take azithromycin if where possible. But this is really, really important to have NSE. NSE should be taken even before we become victim to COVID-19 or we have disease from it. Vitamin D should always be taken nowadays. And then vitamin C, quercetin, zinc should be a regular staple intake nowadays. So back here to the discussion. As you can tell that in the presence of vitamin D, our body moves towards anti-inflammatory system. And in the presence of less vitamin D, or in the absence of vitamin D, our body moves toward pro-inflammatory systems. In the pro-inflammatory systems, how many problems are occurring? We have interleukin 21, we have interleukin 17, we have interleukin 6, we have tumor growth factor beta, we will have interleukin 1. And of course, this T helper 1 cell is producing interferon gamma. All of that are going to cause havoc in our body. So Amrenda Singh says, so no kissing? Well, it is a matter of co-stimulation. So if kiss is the only stimulation, then hey, you're okay. But if there is a co-stimulation with that, then that is not allowed, at least not to the immune system. So this is the behavior of vitamin D. Remember, I have done many times this discussion that vitamin D also, this is the discussion I just did was how does it helps keep the immune system innate arm suppressed, and how does it balances out the anti-inflammatory systems work more than the pro-inflammatory. Then we have done this discussion in the past many times that let's say this is an immune cell. Let's say this is a macrophage. Vitamin D helps release cathalicidins, if I'm putting the spellings correctly. Cathalicidins in turn are necessary to punch holes in the virus. Remember, to break it down. Cathalicidins are also necessary to cause chemotaxis of more immune cells to come to the site of infection. And then we talked about the beta defensins, which also require vitamin D levels. Vitamin D levels are necessary for these things to work optimally. And for beta defensins to be working optimally, we need nuclear factor kappa B. And for kappa B's release, we need vitamin D to modulate it, which in turn helps modulate beta defensin, which in turn help kill the pathogen. So cathelicidins, beta-defensin, nuclear factor kappa B, all of them are dependent on the right vitamin D levels to be modulated correctly. So this is the innate immune system. So innate immune system's function is corrected by vitamin D. Adaptive immune system's behavior is moved away from cytokine by vitamin D. And then we now have the study that shows that if the vitamin D level are incorrect, then there is a greater chance of the COVID patients to become ill severely and to become to have fatality. So this is the discussion for today. I will put, after this discussion is over, after the video is over, I'll put all these links in the description, and then you can go and read those as well. This is a fascinating study. It's a very beautiful study they've done. I loved the way they conducted their processes, their methods. I love them, and please read it. So vitamin D levels are really important. If you cannot get enough sun, then get supplements. For people with the dark skin, they must get supplements, and we should go from there. So this is it. We'll stop here. Tomorrow is my off. We will start day after tomorrow. Look at my smile for the day off. So we'll start day after tomorrow. Please tell me, what would you like to discuss? Absolutely. So, Doctor, I tried to donate. Can you put a donate button on your page? I will do it. Are you talking about the Facebook page? Yes. So vitamin B3, niacin. So we can talk about that as well. So one more thing, this study gave us one more gift idea here, and that was ibuprofen. They said that the possible role, because I don't believe in this one, the possible role. So let me share my screen for a second to show you this. Possible role of ibuprofen in, let's see if I can find it quickly. Here, this is the same study that I'm going to put the link out. The reported potential role of ibuprofen in worsening COVID-19 treatment might also be partially explained by its suppression of innate immunity, which leads to a higher viral load and a consequent overactivation of the adaptive immune system, which again may become fatal in elderly patients. So this is the first time I could actually see a possible link of ibuprofen. I was not convinced about ibuprofen being dangerous before, but this makes sense what they're talking about. So if I can avoid it, I will avoid it. And look at this. Vitamin D, on the other hand, may boost the innate immune system and suppress the adaptive immune system, thus lowering cytokine levels. Therefore, it is protective. And I really enjoyed their creativity that they use C-reactive protein levels as a surrogate for the vitamin D levels, and then they could figure out that who has vitamin D levels correct or who does not. And from there, they could do the remaining study. So that was awesome. So guys, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for the discussion together. Chloroquine is not good. So Rafila is saying chloroquine about COVID. Chloroquine is very dangerous in its side effects. So I would not use chloroquine. Hydroxy is better. Lymphocyte T auxiliaries. So please tell me, what would you like to discuss on Monday? Tomorrow is my off, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much, everyone. And yes, the D hammer works. The hammer works. Absolutely. Absolutely. See the link I've sent in the discussion about quercetin. I would. Thank you. Anti-inflammatory. Okay. Makers of Tylenol. YouTube. I like your idea that ibuprofen comes with the makers of Tylenol. Bless you, doctor. All right. Guys, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Please like, subscribe, and share this. That is how you can help me. When you like and subscribe, that allows the YouTube to show our video to more people. That allows me some ad revenue, and that helps me. So thank you. Talk to you on Monday.